Chapter 16. London, England, September 7th. There was blood on the ice. Skrymir glanced down at the human blood that was smeared on his long, frozen talons and dappled across his icy shell, and he uttered a guttural noise that was more snarl than laugh. Still, it was a sound of pleasure, for it had been far too long sitting in that damned stronghold since he last had the joy of slaughtering human beings who had not been brought into him as prisoners. This was better, much better. For eons, it seemed, he had been patient, and more patience would be required before he was through. But at this very moment, bloodshed. Glorious murder. The sounds of war and terror echoed in the streets of London. Hundreds upon hundreds of Luftwaffe planes dropped bombs. Fires burned on the east side, raging high as though angry at the aircraft that buzzed above. The Royal Air Force was retaliating, but it was too little, too late. The Blitz had come, and London would never be the same. In the house on Great Russell Street, the walls shook with the force of explosions not far off. The focus of the attack was a ways off, but that did not stop bombs from going astray and falling nearby. Skrymir exulted in the chaos and the screams, both out in the streets of London, and there in the headquarters of his most hated enemies, the Council of Watchers. In the short hall on the third floor, Skrymir stood fast against an onslaught. He had come down the central stairwell from above to find a handful of Watchers and Council operatives already standing in opposition to his attack. His gnarled, armored Nidavellir foot soldiers followed him down. The Council's defenders did their best with their weapons at their disposal. Large chunks of ice had been hacked from Skrymir's shoulder, and one of his talons sheared off by the sword of a Watcher. The man now lay broken and twisted in a pool of his own blood on the floor between Skrymir's massive legs, spectacles broken and hanging loose from one ear. It was his blood that adorned Skrymir's hands. "Die, demon!" shouted another man, a swarthy Watcher with a large mace in his hands. There were 4 others there in the hall, 2 with crossbows, one with an ornate dagger, and the last with an ugly, oily-smelling pistol. The pistol was Skrymir's primary concern. Crossbow bolts flew at him and past him. One of them punched through the cheek of a Nidavellir, but the little beast simply tore the offending shaft from its flesh. Doors along the corridor and at its far end began to open. Other men appeared, also armed. Skrymir sensed that there were more in the rooms beyond. He thought he glimpsed the barrel of a machine gun, and he knew that the men armed with more conventional weapons were operatives, not Watchers. Those were the ones he had to avoid. It seemed as though the air itself froze for a moment. The sounds of aircraft and exploding bombs, even of screams and shouts on the floors below him, simply stopped. In that moment, Skrymir's smoky essence roiled within its icy shell, and its frozen form rippled and changed. By instinct he pulled moisture from the air around him, and his icy flesh erupted with even more jagged protrusions, including a pair of enormous, curving horns that were heavy upon his brow. The fear in the humans' faces was plain, but so was their resolution. From the second floor came a shout of fury and alarm. Behind him the foot soldiers snorted and stamped, filled with bloodlust. Skrymir looked past the mace-wielding Watcher before him and beyond 2 other men to meet the confident gaze of the man with the pistol. The weapon came up, barrel aimed directly at Skrymir. The demon lord was not afraid, but he did not know enough about guns and did not wish to learn. The swarthy one with the mace lunged at him. The sounds of the world outside began again. An air raid siren, a staccato run of explosions from far off, then another close by. Windows shattered at either end of the hall. The mace swept through the air. The pistol was leveled. The operative holding it pulled the trigger. Skrymir rose up. With the talons of his right hand, he tore off the arm of the Watcher who attacked him with the mace, sending flesh, bone, and weapons sailing over the railing and down onto the stairs leading to the second floor. With his left hand, he grabbed the swarthy Watcher by the head and lifted him up. So swiftly did he move that the bullets fired from the operative's gun punched into the Watcher's body, where Skrymir held it before him as a shield of flesh. The body jumped obscenely, amusingly, and then Skrymir threw at the others in the hall. 2 of them fell, scrambling with their weapons, caught between the urge to attack and the instinct to save themselves. Either way, it was too late for them. The Nidavellir behind Skrymir could not do their duty trapped in this narrow passage. Their master had to clear the path, and cleared it he did. Even as the man with the pistol leveled it at him again, aiming quite carefully for his eyes, Skrymir trampled the man on the floor with his icy hooves. Amidst their screams of agony he turned, raised his wings, and lashed out. One frozen wing cut into the wall, battering portraits from their hooks. The other wing, crackling with the constantly shifting ice, slashed out and easily sliced through the flesh and bone of the operative's neck. Fresh blood gouted from the beheaded corpse's neck and spattered Skrymir's wings even before the head tumbled to the floor and rolled toward the open door at the end of the hall. Skrymir bellowed, rage and bliss surging within him. Wrapped in a dance of emotions he had not felt the likes of for centuries. "He's killed them!" shouted a Watcher from one of the side rooms. "We've got to stop him before he reaches the girls!" "Yes! By all means, stop me!" Skrymir roared, even as he trampled the wounded and dying Watchers that were beneath his hooves. The walls shook again. But this was his doing, not that of the German bombs. This was war. Nothing else mattered. Not even the human conflict taking place simultaneously out in the city. "Go!" Skrymir commanded, holding out a hand to point past the railing to the stairs leading downward. With a course of murderous bestial ascent, the gnarled little warriors obeyed. They did not bother with the stairs. Rather, they simply rushed the railing, shattering through the wooden balusters and crashing down onto the stairs, leaping one after the other, axes flashing as they thundered down after the slayers-in-waiting and their protectors. Wolves in the fold. "Come, then," Skrymir shouted. "Give me your lives." And they did. Watchers shouted with fury and fear as they clattered out into the hall. Skrymir counted at least 5 males and 3 females. 4 of the men were operatives, armed with guns. 2 of them were armed with machine guns. Of the watchers, the demon recognized Abram Levin and Charles Rochmond from spying on the goings-on in the house for so long. Levin stepped forward. "No farther!" he shouted. At his signal, the others raised their weapons. The operatives aimed their guns, but did not fire. Rochmond held an ancient longbow far too unwieldy for the close premises, but it was steady in his hands, and the arrowhead was wide and gleaming with a razor edge. The man was a fool. Arrows might have harmed his Nidavellir, even killed them, but they would have less than no effect on him. "You have made a grave error, demon," Abram Levin told him as the council's defenders gathered closer around Skrymir. "Do you think we would not be prepared for an attack?" The board of directors suspected that the vampire's predations were only preamble for some more sinister scheme. "Now you have revealed yourself as its author." Skrymir laughed. Greenish flames flickered from his eyes, a fiery emulsion from the mist at his core. "I'm sorry," he said, snickering and glaring at each of them. "This is how you prepare? To do what, other than die at my hands?" Charles Rochmond took a single step back, wrist not even quivering, though he still held back the string on the longbow. "Appearances can be deceiving, Skrymir." The demon flinched. "Yes, I recognize you. Some of us are warriors, others are scholars. You have been gone long enough to have obtained the status of myth once more, but I recognize you. We may not be able to defeat you, or at least not without a great deal more blood, but we are prepared. Withdraw now, before we discover precisely how well." Skrymir stared at him, incredulous. Another ripple went through him, a crackling of shifting ice. With a sudden snarl, Skrymir thrust out his right arm and his talons stretched, lengthening impossibly as the moisture was sucked from the air around him to add to his body mass. His jagged fist punched through the chest of one of the machine-gun-wielding operatives, and he tore the screaming man's heart out, cutting the scream off abruptly. A momentary torrent of bullets ripped the ceiling, and they were cut off as instantly as the dead man screamed. The gun clattered to the floor. The others attacked. Crossbow bolts flew, bullets punched the air. Skrymir wrapped his frozen wings around his body as a shield. Machine gun fire shattered his wings, and they fell in pieces to the floor. The demon roared in pain, but that sacrifice brought him precious seconds, during which he lashed out and knocked one operative through a shattered railing to break his neck on the stairs, squashed the skull of another against the wall, and disarmed the third. In rage, he swept through them. His arms became scythes. Bones were shattered, some were cut. Blood flew, and Skrymir sang a melody not heard upon the face of the earth since Woden walked the world. Abram Levin began to withdraw. "Keep back!" he shouted to Rochmond, the only other survivor save himself. "Leave it to the others now," he called out. Skrymir flicked out a hand, and with a swipe of a single talon across the man's eyes, he blinded the watcher forever. But he left the man alive. Fuming, eyes blazing with flickering greenish flame, Skrymir rounded on Charles Rochmond. He shuddered, and the ice that had made up his wings was drawn to him, absorbed once again into his form, emerging from within its jagged spikes on his back. His horns grew, and he stood, suddenly, several inches taller. He was forced to crouch in the hall, towering over Rochmond, who quivered as he stared at the demon. "You have not loosed your arrow, Watcher," Skrymir said, his voice filled with insinuation, for he deemed the man a coward to simply stand there and watch as his fellows were massacred. "I have one task, demon. I have had failures in the past, and I will not allow another," Rochmond said courageously, stretching his neck but keeping his gaze steady. "For the moment, I wait." "You die," Skrymir told him, confounded by the fool's inaction. There had been a great clamor below. Screams and shouts of men and women. Girls. Slayers-in-waiting, Skrymir expected. But also the sharing of furniture and impact after impact upon the walls. Now, though, up from below there came a wail of agony unlike any he had ever heard before. Voices in unison, exploding with pain. The voices were not human. Over the distant noise of planes and bombs exploding, he could hear the sound of heavy blades striking flesh and clanging off of armor, and the pounding of booted feet upon the stairs. A Nidavellir screamed in a language older than man as it struggled to climb the stairs. It cried out like an infant as it slowed, halfway up. Skrymir saw it emerge into his field of vision, and his anger was matched only by his disgust. It was one of his foot soldiers, of course, but unrecognizable. The little beast was on fire, deep blue flames engulfing its body, burning high and bright and smoking oily black sulfur. It was not natural fire, but a magical inferno that engulfed the beast. Its face had already begun to melt off its knobby, misshapen skull. A madness swept through Skrymir, a lunatic fury like nothing he had ever known. All of his careful planning, all of his misdirection and the cleverness for which he had congratulated himself, and the arrogant human pigs of the Watcher's Council had known it. Whether they had sensed it, learned of it through their supernatural intrigues, or simply used logic, the eyeless, mewling watch on the floor had not lied. They had been expecting him. "Damn you!" Skrymir screeched as he took a step toward Roachmont. The Watcher's legs quivered, and tears formed at the corners of his eyes. He saw hell itself coming for him, Skrymir knew, and he was right. The fear in Charles Roachmont was wondrous to behold. But Roachmont kept his hand steady. The arrow did not so much as twitch. The Watcher held his breath and loosed the arrow. It flew across the hall, slicing the air. Skrymir ignored it. A tiny little blade. What harm could it do? At the last moment he saw the runes etched into the metal head of the arrow, but in his maddened state he ignored the alarm that sounded within him. The tip of the arrow burned through the ice at his midsection. Skrymir reached out and tore the bow away from Roachmont, then impaled the Watcher with the length of curved wood before kicking him with a frozen hoof hard enough to send him pinwheeling back and out through the shattered window to fall to his death 3 stories below on the stone steps of the building. The arrow burned him. It had melted the icy shell around him, but it did more than that. The second's metal tip cut deep enough to reach the green vapor at his core. That mist ignited with blue flame. His true self was on fire. Skrymir screamed loud enough to blow out the war beyond those walls. The floor shook. Ice cracked and sloughed from his form. Water trickled from his limbs and he began to melt. Panic ran through him as the fire burned the vapor that composed his true body. The magical flame consumed part of him, and it was as though a limb had been sheared off. "No!" the demon cried in a frenzy. He collapsed. The ice melted away where the arrow had entered, and the shaft clattered to the floor not far from the broken and bloody corpses he had trampled a minute before. The vapor began to leak. Skrymir roared again, steeled himself for the pain. He concentrated, and with a loud crackling noise, the ice that made up his shell shifted again, dramatically. The portion of his midsection where his misty flesh burned was suddenly cut from the rest of his vapor form by walls of ice. The center portion of ice surrounding the burning vapor, a dying portion of himself, was cut away and fell to the ground, melting quickly and producing a trail of smoke. "Magic!" The demon was on his knees, bent over, hands clasped across the enormous wound in his frozen shell, even as the ice cracked and shifted to fill the hole. With the wound closed, Skrymir shuddered once, then stood and examined the carnage that surrounded him. It was only the beginning. Cries of agony shouted in ancient tongues rose from the floors below, and the demon stood up to his full height once more. "Prepared," he snarled quietly. "They thought they were prepared for me." Skrymir sprouted wings once more, frozen shell cracking and reforming, stealing moisture from the air. Hooves splintering the wooden floor, he ran to the end of the hall and threw himself out the shattered window. Wings spread, he soared high before turning back upon the headquarters of the Watcher's Castle and diving toward a window on the 2nd floor. The sky above him was dark, blotted out by the specter of war, but the seemingly infinite sweep of bombers and fireplanes that slashed the heavens. He could hear screams echoing across the city, could smell the fires burning not far away. "This," he thought, "this is the way the whole world will be when I am through. Hell on earth." Copenhagen, Denmark, September 7th. Sophie Cartensen was 17. She had barely noticed the passing of the days, but the week before, on August 31st, she had turned 17. Her breath plumed in the chill air, but she made no sound as she slipped across the land surrounding Christianborg Palace. Months had passed since she had experienced her greatest victory here, the defeat of the vampire king Gorm. It had been a lifetime. Denmark was no longer ruled by the royal family, but by Nazi conquerors. The palace, where so many of the functions of Danish government had been carried out before, had more than a share of German soldiers marching about the grounds. Another time, in another world, perhaps even had she still been the girl who had triumphed here earlier in the year, Sophie might have done things differently. This day, this long afternoon, the Slayer was ruthless. She moved across the palace grounds like a sliver of moonlight, a ghost against the pale light. It was sometime after 5 o'clock. 11 German soldiers died upon her sword for no reason other than that they were the enemy, that they invaded her homeland, and that they stood in her way. Stood between her and the shattered woman who was her only true friend in the world, her watcher, Jetta Narvik. Silent and murderous, Sophie found her way to a hidden entrance to the ruins of Bishop Absalon's castle, the remains of a time forgotten, upon which the palace had been built. Gorm had made his lair there, and Sophie could not stop herself from wondering how Spike and Drusilla had come to do the same. They must have learned of it somehow. Perhaps they had held some special dread for her. They were wrong. The mad, flitting Drusilla, a nightmare creature of dark fairy tales, and her lover, the swaggering Spike, had badly miscalculated. Sophie had grown tired of obeying the council, of blindly following their edicts and leaving her homeland to the predations of monsters far more numerous than vampires. Had they disappeared into legend, lurking amid the human populations of some other nations or continents, she would have let them go, no matter what they had already done. But now, in a narrow passage of stone, with only a torch flickering on the wall sconce for light, Sophie paused, finding herself suddenly weak. Without her parents, Yenna was all she had. If she were to lose her watcher, the Slayer knew she would truly have lost everything. With a single breath, she calmed herself. Both hands were firmly wrapped about the hilt of the sword of her ancestors. In their name, and the names of king and council, but more than anything for Yenna, she moved more deeply into the vampire's lair, eyes ticking right and left. The sconces would not be lit if the place were abandoned. Not that she had even considered the possibility. They were here. They were waiting. Something shifted in the shadows of a narrow tunnel off to her right. A vampire, tall and thin with a mane of wild hair. A Dane, just as she was. Sophie turned quickly to meet the attack. Her blade whistled as it sliced the air, the only sound before it cut clean through the vampire's neck. It was dust before it could fall to the uneven stone floor. Two others approached from behind her, coming into the lair just as she had. Perhaps Spike had thought she might become frightened and try to leave. If so, he was a fool. Yenna had become obsessed with him, arrogant and handsome and clever and vicious. Spike was all those things. Perhaps now, Sophie thought, Yenna would have realized the depths of his evil. Or perhaps that had been his allure all along. The newly arrived vampires were dispatched even more quickly than the first. Her resolve even stronger, her jaws set, expression grave. Sophie moved along the dimly lit corridor of crumbling stone. With a toss of her head, she swept her hair over her shoulder. Her legs were slightly bent, even as she walked, prepared for combat at any moment. Without further incident, she found herself entering the same chamber where she had killed Gorm. The tapestries and paintings were gone, likely stolen by Gorm's followers after their master's death. Candles burned upon iron stands, and torches flared in sconces on the walls on the side of the room nearest her. On the far side, there were only shadows and ghosts of shapes, and images flitting in the darkness that might have been tricks of the light upon her eyes. Long blade held out before her, Sophie slid into the chamber, into what might as well have been a spotlight given the strategic light in the room. Nothing moved. The chamber was silent. Then there came a muffled cry. "Yenna!" "I've come!" Sophie said barely, her voice echoing in the room. "I would ask you to free her, but I know that you won't. You want to kill me. Come and kill me, then. If you can, she'll die. If you fail, I'll take her away with me." From the shadows came the sound of giggling. Then a voice. "You can't take her away. She's my little dolly. We've had the sweetest tea party." Sophie shifted, eyes peering into the darkness. She shivered at the madness in that voice. Suddenly she could see the pale, ghostly face of the vampire emerging from the darkness into the flickering candlelight. Drusilla's face was framed by lustrous, raven black hair, which seemed part of the darkness itself. "Make no mistake," Sophie told her. "I will kill you, you and that devil of yours." Something rustled in the dark behind Drusilla. Muffled cries told Sophie that it was Yenna there, bound and probably gagged as well. She flinched. "Moths fly toward the flame," Drusilla whispered, and carried through the chamber, dark and seductive and totally insane. "Wolves bay at the moon. Fascination in the sparkle of moonlight on the razor's edge. She loves him, you know. I sensed it the first time we crossed paths." Drusilla's hands fluttered before her face, fingers twirling in some perverse pantomime. A thin smile flickered in the half-shadows behind her hands. "She loves him," the vampire repeated. She tilted her head to one side and regarded the Slayer steadily. "Naughty, naughty. I like her, though. The more I tortured her, the more I hurt her. I think she only loved him more." Sophie would not allow her lip to quiver. Her teeth ground together. But she could not stop the single tear that welled in the corner of her left eye and slipped down her cheek. Drusilla disappeared into the darkness for a moment. When she emerged once more, she was dragging Yenna by the hair. Never had it taken so much effort for the Slayer to hold herself back. But she waited. Yenna cried out in pain against the gag in her mouth. Then Drusilla dropped her and, astonishingly, removed the gag. "Yenna?" Sophie ventured, gaze roving about the room, searching the shadows for Spike or other vampires in his employ. The watcher turned her eyes up. She wept openly, though barely seemed to notice her tears. Her gaze seemed hollow and distant, and she rocked ever so slightly. Her right cheek was coated, and there were slashes and burns on her face and neck. The bruising was so severe that the left side of her face was swollen and black. Sophie could see that both her arms were broken. More damage she could only guess at. All of that, the two vampires had accomplished in a few short hours. "Go," the Watcher whispered. "Go now, Sophie. Run fast and far. I am already dead." Sophie stiffened. Her sword rotated in her hands as she flexed her arms and wrists. A cold certainty had filled her, though she fought against it. There was only one reason Yana would tell her to go, to run away like a coward. "She's had a vision," Sophie thought. "I'm going to die." "You're really quite beautiful, you know," Spike said, just a voice in the shadows. "It's going to be a bloody crime to tear you apart." Slowly, as though strolling through a park on a romantic evening, Spike stepped into the light. His smile was charming, his manner pure whimsy. "But we'll do it," he promised. "Oh yeah, we'll do you up right, little girl." London, England, September 7th. In the foyer of the house on Great Russell Street, Ariana de la Croix stared in horror as the corpse of a gnomish, leather-skinned, armor-clad warrior crashed through the wooden second-story railing, engulfed in blue flames, and tumbled to the stairs, only to roll to a stop 2 feet from where she stood. Its body was a blazing husk by the time it came to rest, eye sockets empty, face charred down to the bone. "Nidavellir, so it really is him, as the seer suspected," Marie-Christine said, then tugged on Ariana's arm. "Come, we must go down into the basement." Angrily, Ariana pulled away from her. Her expression was almost feral as she stared up the stairs, wincing at the sounds of battle that came down from above. Sir Nigel, one of the council's board of directors, was just down the hall, urging Eleanor, Isabel, and the other girls to flee into the basement with John Travers and several other watchers. An operative named Gillian Partington stood with Miss Fontaine, and 2 women were adamant in trying to pull her away. "Where's Charles?" Ariana shouted, rounding on them. "He should be here. He's my watcher." "And he would want you to be safe," Miss Fontaine told her sternly. "You must come along, Ariana. With the Germans attacking, the basement is the only—" "Don't treat me as if I'm a child!" Ariana screamed at her, almost snarling. "What's happening upstairs has nothing to do with the Germans. Nothing to do with the British either. What's upstairs, that's the real war. The one we've been trained for. But you want to hide it in the basement." Her words echoed down the hall, drawing the attention of the other girls. Eleanor Boudreau, the American girl, was the first to begin to move back toward her. Sir Nigel blocked her way, but Eleanor slipped past him. The others followed. "Don't you understand that we can't afford to lose you?" Miss Fontaine pleaded. "Damn you!" Ariana snapped. "I am not yours to lose. If there are demons up there, and they are too much for all of us, then they're going to get us anyway. We have a better chance if we work together." She stepped in close, staring at the older woman eye to eye. "Charles Rochemont is up there, my watcher. I will not let him die for me without at least giving him the respect of standing by his side." A strong hand gripped her shoulder, and Ariana was spun around and then driven, hard, back against the front door. The handle jabbed her lower back as Gillian held her there, pinned by the throat. "Chances are you're too late with Rochemont. He was up on the 3rd level. Likely he's already dead. You, on the other hand, are alive. And whatever Mademoiselle Fontaine and the others instruct you to do, that is exactly what—" Ariana pummeled her in the face with a swift punch, then followed through with a blow to the gut before kicking Gillian to the ground. The operative groaned, wiped blood from her mouth, and reached for the gun she wore in a holster beneath her coat. "Gillian, no!" Miss Fontaine cried. The operative never touched her gun. Eleanor Boudreau and Isabel Cortez grabbed her from behind. Isabel whispered to her in Spanish, but Eleanor had her eyes on Miss Fontaine. "Ariana's right. You've trained us to do a lot of things, mademoiselle, but you never trained us to hide. We won't do that," Eleanor told her. Behind them, Sir Nigel cleared his throat. He was about to protest. John Travers, the handsome young watcher she had come to admire very much, spoke up first. "Don't do this, please, Ariana. Eleanor, you know better. The directors know what's best for you and for the council. People are dying upstairs to protect your lives. If you throw them away, their deaths will be meaningless." "Their deaths will mean less than nothing if we all die, Jean," Ariana told him, though she spoke more gently to him than any of the others. "It's all we know how to do." Ariana and the other girls moved quickly through the first floor, arming themselves with weapons taken from displays and from the few watchers who had been prepared to stay with them in the basement. Ariana herself took up the axe from the Time Monster's corpse on the floor. With 6 other girls following her, she headed for the stairs. John glanced once at Marie-Christine before following, a grave expression on his face. There were 2 more dead Nidavellir at the top of the stairs, but that was nothing in comparison to the carnage that greeted them when they reached the second-floor landing. Strewn up and down the hallway, laying half in and half out of various rooms, were broken and bleeding corpses. Most of them were Nidavellir, but at least 5 were human. Watchers and operatives Ariana had known, or at least greeted at breakfast or dinner in the house since she had arrived. The human dead were a far more horrible sight, not merely because they were people instead of monsters, but because of their wounds. One man was impaled upon a broken baluster from the railing at the top of the stairs. A woman Ariana knew only as Catherine had one of the dwarf warrior's axes lodged in her skull, her eyes wide and dull and dead. Others had limbs severed or their viscera strung out from enormous abdominal wounds. Isabel cried out to God and muttered a prayer, though she was on guard for more attackers. Several of the girls backed away slightly, even taking a step or two down the stairs. One of them fell to her knees and threw up. Eleanor stood stalwartly at Ariana's side, and John came up right behind them. The battle was not over, but near enough. Two of the gnome creatures still stood, their axes over their heads, their armor singed but not burning. They looked older than the others, grizzled and even more gnarled. Gnashing their teeth, they moved toward the lone surviving watcher on this floor. His name was Trevor Kenningston, and Ariana thought he was the oldest man she had ever seen. He was also, she now saw, the most powerful. For as Mr. Kenningston muttered words in a guttural language under his breath, his arthritic fingers contorting and sketching symbols on the air, blasts of blue flame swirled out from his hands and engulfed the Nidavellir. Simultaneously they burst into flame, shrieking in agony as death claimed them. Mr. Kenningston staggered backward until he hit the wall and leaned there for support, rheumy eyes watering, breath coming too fast. He was weak and growing weaker. He had been extraordinary a moment before, a vision of magical power, of arcane sorcery. Now he was merely a very old man once more. I don't understand, Ariana said, glancing from Kenningston to John, who came up next to her in the hall. Is it over? Mr. Kenningston looked up at her. His skin was pale and wrinkled and drawn back over his face so that he looked like little more than a shroud-covered skull. It's just beginning, he rasped, wheezing. From the end of the hall there came a roar. The window was already broken, but the frame shattered as well as an enormous winged demon made of ice barged through it. The creature was like nothing Ariana had ever seen. All jagged ice and horns, wide wings popping as the ice shifted inside it. A green mist floated at its core as ice burned with green fire. It laughed, and Ariana felt so cold she wondered if its ice had extended out to envelop them all. Scrymere, Mr. Kenningston said. Weakly, he forced himself to stand erect once more. Kenningston? The demon asked, sounding almost amused. Will you never die? Not today, the ancient watcher promised. He lifted his hands and began to mutter in that guttural tongue again, fingers twisting into impossible configurations. With a flash of one icy razor-sharp wing, Scrymere the demon cut Trevor Kenningston in half. The old man's corpse fell forward, slamming to the floor with enough momentum that the top half of his body tumbled forward and over the broken railing to fall down to the stairs, then roll into the foyer below. Ariana heard Miss Fontaine and Sir Nigel crying out in alarm and grief. Steeling herself, she hefted the battle axe she had taken from the dead monster and stepped forward. Eleanor, Isabel, John Travers, and several other girls followed. She could hear some of the other watchers from downstairs running up behind them to help. The ice demon's frozen tongue snaked out and slid over his lips. Ah, it said, staring at the girls. The main course.